leads for the Wellbeing for Education Return project across Nottingham. So we're calling this the Nottingham Project. It's a collaboration between Nottinghamshire and Nottingham City. Today we have a range of multi-agency professionals and school staff and educational setting staff from across Newark and Sherwood district. So it's really exciting. So my job is to work across the county, and I've never actually worked as the link educational psychologist in Newark and Sherwood. So it's really nice to meet some new people, although it's virtual. So our best hopes for the session today is that you leave the session knowing exactly what the Wellbeing for Education Return project is, that you access the content from webinar 1, that we do a bit of a check-in. We're using these district events to check in with our schools, to find out how things are going, and to help us to plan what you need in the coming months in the return to school. So we're recognizing while we are bringing some ideas and content to you today, you guys have been working away even since before September in the summer term and over the summer holidays, working really hard to get schools ready to receive kids back. So a big purpose for us today as the County Council, NHS and other partners is to check in with schools, find out what's happening for you, what's working well, what's not working, and what you need next. So we're going to be asking you through a survey at the end of the session as well. The other thing is to identify in your area as leaders and mental health leads in your schools, what services are around you and what resources are around you. So to that end, I've got a couple of colleagues with me today. I'm going to be sharing the resources with you and talking you through some of these slides, but we also have resources on the chat. So I'm going to ask colleagues to introduce themselves. And as we go through the session, any questions you have, big or small, if you ask them on the chat, colleagues will be able to answer for you. Okay, so I'm just going to start off with our colleagues from the mental health support teams and the primary mental health team. So Lisa Bamford and Heather, do you guys want to introduce yourselves? And you're going to be with us for the first half an hour.
Hi, yeah, my name's Lisa Bamford and I'm from the mental health support team of CAMS. And my colleague Heather, I think, has joined the Gedling group by mistake.
Oh,
okay. I think she's on her way over here.
I'm here. I'm here, Lisa.
Hooray! Hi, Heather.
Yeah. Okay, Heather, she's there. You can introduce herself.
I'm here.
So Heather, you're from the primary mental health team. Did you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm from the CAMS primary mental health team, so I cover the north of the county. So we're the team that was set up for early intervention and prevention, offering consultations to professionals that have got a worry or a concern about a young person, and also deliver the mental health training across the county.
Fab, thanks for joining us, Heather. We're also joined by Caroline Chrissy, who I think lots of you will know as your link person from the SEMH team, Social Emotional Mental Health team. So Caroline, I wondered, did you want to say hello? Although lots of people will know you, introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, sure. So hi, for those, lots of my schools are here, but for those that don't know me, I'm Caroline Chrissy and I'm the specialist teacher within the SEMH team, and I support the Newark and Minster families of schools. So for those of you who don't know me, that's my role.
Thanks, Caroline. We've also got Tracy Ayres as well from your team. Hi, Tracy. Nice surprise. I didn't know you were joining us. So then I have some colleagues from the tech team. So we've got that is the Tackling Emerging Threats to Children team. So we've got Natalie, Ben and Kirsten. I wondered, did you guys just want to pop on and introduce yourselves?
Hello, I'm Natalie. Thanks for doing the long introduction there, because I hate saying our long names. So yeah, we're sometimes known as the tech team for short as well. So I am Natalie and I lead on emotional health and wellbeing as part of the tech team. And we do cover different localities. So mine is Mansfield and Ashfield, but because emotional health and wellbeing obviously doesn't just happen in Mansfield and Ashfield, we kind of cover everywhere. So I'll pass you over to Kirsten.
Hi everyone, Kirsten Lamb, part of the tech team and the CSE coordinator within the team, and do a lot of work around relationship, sex and health education, and Newark, Sherwood and Bassetlaw are my locality areas. So nice to meet you all virtually.
Fantastic. And Ben, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, my name is Ben Acifo. I work for the tech team. I lead on risk-taking behaviour. So that's your drugs, alcohol, knife crime, child criminal exploitation. And like Kirsten, my area is Nottinghamshire with Basset Law. And thanks for having me.
Fab. And Sarah Angle is here as well from the SCMH team. Hello. Great to have you. Okay, so everybody, you are most welcome. Your dream team on the chat have just introduced themselves. As we go through, any reflections or comments, they're going to be getting back to you via the chat. We also have a very important person who I forgot to introduce, who's Ed Goodson, who is one of our colleagues from the projects team in the County Council, who is here for technical support. So if you have any issues at all, there are no silly questions in here today. So just pop a question on the chat if you're struggling with connection, seeing the slides, anything at all, and Ed will be able to get back to you. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share some content with you, and then at various points throughout the session, which is going to run until 5 p.m, we're going to be sharing with you punctuation points where we're going to be asking you, what do you think of the content, what's helpful, what do you want more of or less of, etc. Everything that we're sharing today, including the slides, will be available on the Wellbeing for Education Return project site that I'm going to share with you. So you can use this PowerPoint if you're running any staff meetings or any small sessions for staff, parents' evening, anything at all. Everything we talk about will be shared on this website, so you'll be able to access this. The slides are on there already, and at the end of the week, when all the webinars are finished, this webinar recording will be available. So you'll be able to share it with colleagues, anybody who couldn't come to the session today. Okay, let's get started. So what we're sharing with you today is webinar 1 from the Wellbeing for Education Return, which is a DFE funded project, which is focusing on mental health and wellbeing training, learning from the pandemic. So some universal psychology, we're going to talk to you about recovery from challenges and crisis, but also some specific learning about what schools have been learning nationally and locally in the last couple of months. So the resources in their original form were designed by the Anna Freud Centre and MindEd, and many of you might be familiar with them if you've been part of any of the mental health link projects or any of the training with the mental health support teams. And the version that you're going to see today is a localized version which has been developed with a great collaboration of colleagues from education, health and social care in Nottinghamshire and Nottingham City. So we are running 7 district events across the 7 districts of Nottinghamshire, and our colleagues are running events in the city as well to share this. The webinar is part of the project, and this is the bigger project, just to give you a start. So what we're doing today is really sort of starting things, and hopefully there's lots more exciting things to come. So the first thing is the training for mental health leads in schools, which is what we're starting with you today. The second thing is a new resource website with a focus on wellbeing for education return. So as you know, we've been using the East Midlands Education Support website to share resources with you all throughout lockdown. And schools have been giving us resources, we've been adding them on there. So we have a slightly new focus on this subpage of that website, which is about the Wellbeing for Education Return project. So the training is going to happen across 2 1.5-hour twilight webinars. Session 1 today is about resilience and recovery at a whole school level. And we're going to be sharing you predominantly the resources from a recovery handbook that we were involved in developing. And some of the schools in Nottinghamshire will recognise some of your work in there. So we had a chance to showcase the work of Nottinghamshire schools. The second webinar, which will be in late November, December, again will be district level, and it will be focusing on individual needs and local networks. The content for the second one hasn't been designed yet because we want to know after these sessions what would be most useful. And actually, when we do the districts, if different districts want and need different things, we're also going to respond to that. Okay, so we're working on these webinars. That's number 1 and 2 in the project. Number 3, then, we're working on, in collaboration with the city, a local offer for mental health support. So this will be a website, much like the local offer, Not Help Yourself, focusing specifically on mental health services. There are some other really good versions. So there's one in Leeds that we really like called MindMate. And so we really like the model of that. It's a website where children, young people, schools, parents and carers can go. They can get self-help information and signposting to local and national support services around mental health, all in one place, a collaboration between the County Council and NHS colleges and the charity sector. So this is something that all these colleagues have been working on for a long time, but we've actually now been lucky to get some funding as part of the Wellbeing for Education Return project to commission this website, get it set up and pull it all together. So that is going to be a big piece of the work that is going to be available by the end of the academic year. And we are going to get it up and running as soon as we can. The other thing we're going to support is local networks for mental health leads. So part of the thing we're trying to create through these district events is you guys coming together as school staff, linking with the different professionals in your area, getting to know who the teams are, us sharing links with you, and also building on the growth of the mental health support teams, which are currently existing in some areas of the county. There's some new ones going to be rolled out in the spring term, and we're hoping to link up with that. So as mental health leads in schools, you at the end of this project will have a really good idea about what support is there for you in terms of resources and support services. Okay, lovely. Natalie's put the link to the Leeds resource in the chat. Just to let you know that the training is a cascade model from the DFE. So the original resources that have been shared, we will add them to our website, but there's lots of content in there that we haven't included, because what we've had is the government designed training sent to the local authority. We've made it more locally relevant. And also if you want to deliver any of these slides in your schools, you also have the freedom to take the bits that work for you and change it again for your whole school college implementation. So this cascade model is the way that it works. By the time you use these resources, you might like bits of it, you might like to leave out other bits, and that's absolutely fine. Okay. So the other thing I just wanted to draw your attention to in the introduction is the Every Mind Matters project. So this is an NHS initiative that the government and the NHS are launching alongside the Wellbeing for Education Return, which is a website, a set of resources for looking after your mental health, and particularly focused on adults and young people, information, resources. So this is something that the Wellbeing for Education Return runs alongside. Okay. So this is our plan for webinars 1 and 2. Today, we're talking about whole school approaches and resources. So we're going to share with you key models of psychological recovery and resilience. We're going to talk about how we apply this in a pandemic using a graduated response, which I'm sure lots of you will be familiar with. And we're going to share with you a range of resources, particularly local services and resources that are available to you in schools that you can also share with young people and with parents and carers. And we're going to have a think about where do we go next with these local networks. Our rough plan for webinar 2 comes from the content from the DFE, more detailed information about individual mental health needs, impact of things like anxiety and low mood, loss and bereavement. And as part of the evaluation of today, we're going to ask you about, as a Newark and Sherwood district, what's the most relevant content that you would like to see in webinar 2? Okay, so we're going to look after ourselves as we go through this process today. Certainly, all conversations I have had with school staff in my casework in the last week, the common theme I'm hearing is that people are tired. People are really exhausted and they've been working so hard for so long. There's a lot of uncertainty out there about how long things are going to go for. So there's going to be a key theme within all of this content about look after yourself. At the top of every slide, you'll see this love heart. This is this gentle prompt all the time as adults working in this area, whether you're supporting staff in your schools as a school leader or you're working one-to-one with children and families, remember to look after yourselves. And as well for colleagues who are around in the chat today, the same for you. We're going to share with care. The content that we're sharing with you, we're going to be very mindful of the context that you're working in schools, how tired and exhausted and how hard everyone's been working. And the same when you're sharing examples, feel free to share what you want to and just to listen if that's what works for you today. Reminder about confidentiality. Feel free to share examples of good practice and things that aren't working well, but because we're in a district arrangement today, just please don't share any names of individual children and families. And we're also going to talk about respecting and valuing difference and diversity, particularly difference and diversity within different people's experiences. My colleague Katie, one of the psychologists, shared this really helpful idea with me that we're all in the same storm but we're also all in different boats. Some people's boats are really strong and sturdy, some people's boats are rickety and there's water leaking in. So we are all going through this together, but people are having different experiences. So we will, respect the difference that is going on. You'll see this echoed in our key messages. Our first key message is that everything we're talking about in terms of the psychology of recovery applies to adults as well as to students. And we've all experienced the challenges as a community. So the resources that we're talking about really have considered on a psychological level our experience within COVID as a critical instant or a community experience where the whole community has been overwhelmed by this challenge. So we know that the pandemic has had an impact on everyone, but within that, we've all had different experiences. We recognise that unfortunately, some young people and adults have experienced traumatic experiences in the past few months, ranging from loss and bereavement all the way to challenging economic and other circumstances. So the common theme across all of the work, and I've seen this in the work that I've been doing in schools, that people are prioritising care and compassion for each other and for ourselves. The other thing that's interesting in some of the research that's coming out, I would say the anecdotal stories that schools have been telling me, but also backed up by some research, is that many children and young people have been excited and looking forward to the return to school. And the familiar routines and relationships, although things are still challenging in some contexts, have been really settling and helpful for some children. And some children have been responding well to that return to school. So these key messages would be really useful to keep in mind. And what I'd really be interested to hear via the chat is whether these key messages ring through to you, whether this makes sense based on your experience, and whether these are things that you are working on and have these been working for you. Okay, so please feel free to share your reflections on the chat as I go through some of the psychological content. So some of you might be aware that the Educational Psychology Service developed, in partnership with colleagues, a handbook for schools in terms of recovery, reintroduction and renewal. Within that, we were able to share the work of Nottinghamshire schools. This all happened in the summer term, and this was shared on a national level. And actually, within the National Wellbeing for Education Return project, it's based on the work of Nottinghamshire services and Nottinghamshire schools, which is a real privilege. So hopefully, as you go through this, you'll see practice shared. And the key thing that we have focused on in this recovery, return, renewal is the importance of relationships for recovery. The 5 key principles of recovery will hopefully be very familiar to people. We have looked at the psychology of recovery, and while we have never gone through a pandemic before, we have gone through crises, and many of your schools have had crises and difficult times where you've been able to cope with the support of the community and other services. So there is a lot to learn from our psychological reaction in times of recovery. So the 5 key principles that all of the advice and support is based upon is, first, to put emotional well-being first for everybody. To second, reaffirm the school's strengths and core values. So at times of crisis, we find that people can be a bit disjointed and lost, and reminding ourselves of our core strengths and values grounds us and reminds us of what we do well. Placing relationships front and centre is another key principle. Reaffirming safety and routines, and I know that is something that in schools people have been working so hard on, from physical and practical safety to emotional safety. And also acknowledging that some of our school communities, adults and children, have experienced loss, change and bereavement over this time, and we need to put the right support in place for them. So these 5 key principles underpin everything that we do. The principles are not in any particular order. They happen sort of all at the same time in different extents. So this is why they're identified as a circle. Okay, so what we've been seeing, as we've gone through the previous months, is the process of resilience, the process of bouncing back from adversity. And what we know from the psychology of resilience is this lovely quote from John Kabat-Zinn: "You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf." So actually, unfortunately, there are many waves that life throws at us, particularly in the last couple of months, that we can't stop, but we can learn to surf the waves. And actually, the process of bouncing back from adversity creates that resilience. The good news, I think the hopeful news when we look at the research around resilience, is that we don't have to be all singing, all dancing, you know, superstars, coping the best anyone's ever coped from challenge. We just have to be just good enough. Resilience is just that bit that gets you up in the morning, into work, gets you there, keeps you going. That's what resilience is. And that's what so many people have been drawing on. So this is a really important check-in point where I'd like to hear from you in terms of what's been working in your schools and what challenges continue. If we look at the psychology of recovery from difficult events, research tells us that the 3 best predictors of growth and recovery are the following. The first is connectedness and relationships. The second is flexible coping skills. And the third is a sense of agency or control. So I'd like to ask for some reflections on the chat, really, about any examples that people have seen in your schools where this has made sense for you. Have you seen the effect of connectedness and relationships, for example, and anything where this is continuing to be a challenge? So if people have any ideas they want to share on the chat, please do. And Natalie, you're going to give me a summary of people's reflections.
Yes, I am. So first up, we've got someone saying they're struggling with staff connectedness. So not being able to get together in the staff room. I know some staff rooms have sort of changed into classrooms effectively, so there's not actually anywhere to meet up. Someone else said, when we're working in bubbles, relationships and new teams are developing really well and quickly as people are together all the time at lunch and everything. So yeah, I think when you're in a bubble, those kind of relationships, but I'm guessing maybe relationships that you might usually have just kind of in and out of work, you're kind of in the same bubble, so you might not have the same sort of level of connectedness with the wider team. Someone said, yeah, the school hall has become our staff room, and that's been a really positive idea. That's great. So we've actually found a solution that there's still a staff room, there's still somewhere to meet up.
Fab. I really like creating a new space where I'm assuming social distancing is more possible, but people can still find that connectedness.
Yeah, because I'd actually said earlier in the chat that in terms of our work, I've spoke to a lot of teachers that are really concerned about their pupils' mental health, but kind of forgetting to take care of themselves. And it's really positive to hear that some schools have thought of some solutions to remain connected to each other.
Yeah, fabulous. And Jenny's saying that you are looking at relationships as a staff. This is interesting. I will say as well that we are going to share the chat. We're going to save the chat as a resource. So we've got a record about, you know, what's happening across all the districts. So this is just so fabulous that you're sharing examples of things that are working and things that you're still finding hard. Thank you. Any other themes from the chat that you just wanted to pick up on, Natalie? I'm just reading as I'm looking. So Daisy said, during the key work of vulnerable child provision, our children really opened up as they were the norm in the bubble, and they built new friendships and support that didn't exist before. So that's really positive. The next thing I think is actually really key to bring up in terms of the strain on parent and staff relationships. Someone's mentioned, so they're not on site and not be able to do that sort of regular contact with staff. I know there's been a lot of drop-offs, or, you know, don't enter the school building, so there might be that 5-minute catch-up might not be happening anymore. Pupils have gone back to their usual classes, can't mix with new supports, and someone said, we completed mental health at work training during lockdown. Staff also have a wellbeing agreement. That's great to hear. That's great. And interesting, a couple of people I'm noticing are sharing that actually those building new relationships with new parents are particularly hard. And that is something that, you know, you really put an emphasis on when you get new students, isn't it? Building the relationships. And actually within the current context, it's hard even just to keep existing relationships going. But yeah, the challenge of building new relationships. Thanks so much.
Bridget had also mentioned the relationships being strong before lockdown, so being actually able to continue that relationship with the anxious children. I know that some staff members I spoke to, when children were being introduced to school, they actually did like a little tour for them virtually to give them a sort of idea of what school would look like. So yeah, it just really shows you the power of relationships that have kind of,
Absolutely.
for those anxious children, made it possible for them to come back to school and feel safe.
Brilliant. And actually, the second point here, what I'm hearing, and what this is really ringing true with some of the schools that I work with, is that people are showing flexible coping skills in being creative about how you stay connected and how you maintain those relationships. So, you know, the lovely example of having the staff room in the school hall, you know, that flexible coping, thinking, you know, what do we need to do differently? Lovely.
Yeah,
Okay.
Oh yeah, I was just sorry. Sorry. Just there's a few more things in the chat, but yeah, just relationships through everything, and that communication and staying connected seems to have what's got most
A really strong theme.
Yeah.
Fab. As I'm going on, if you still have things to share, please do share them, because we will record the chat at the end of the session as a really important resource. Brilliant. And if you have any questions for specific members of the project team, you can also send private messages as well if you want to ask them particular questions about their teams. Lovely. Thanks so much. I'm going to focus a little bit on the sense of agency and control, because actually, by definition of the current challenges we face, there is so much that we can't control. And the uncertainty is really something that is an emotional drain for people, isn't it? You know, even as we sit here today, you know, there's an announcement at 6 o'clock and we don't know exactly the details of it. So there's constantly things changing. I just want, as a group of us, I just want us to reflect a little bit about the psychological impact of that uncertainty. So there is some research here that tells us the things that help us to stay calm. I'm going to read through them, and I just want us to reflect on how much of this we don't have in the current context. So when we know what is happening, when we know how long it will last and if it will end, when we have received clear and trusted information, when there are no conflicting messages, when we are able to think collectively about collective problems, and when we feel connected. So the very nature of the current challenge means that many of these are difficult or, you know, not possible. So what we are talking about is a CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy technique around recognizing the things we can control and the things we can't control. And this has been a really useful coping strategy that has been shared. So this graphic, which was shared online, you know, we really like it. So it tells us that there's things we can control, and again, loads of things that you guys have been sharing about, you know, having a positive attitude, limiting our access to the news and social media, and managing our own social distancing and washing our hands, etc. And when we recognize and control these things, we can let go of the things that we can't control. So this little sort of technique that we're sharing is quite useful. So it'll be interesting on the chat if any of you have found this technique useful. Also sharing this technique with young people who've been quite anxious. We're also wanting to share the idea about the window of tolerance. And this is about the zone in which you are at your best mentally. So this is where you're feeling well and you're functioning well. It's where growth happens. Many schools who use growth mindset recognize this idea. We're sharing it very topically in the visual of a rainbow. And actually what we're saying is that as we get closer to the edges, we need to be careful. And when we hit those clouds and we see signs of distress, we need to take a break and we need to look after ourselves. That is hard in the current situation because we don't know how long things are going on for, but it's sounding already that you in schools are doing a really good job about connecting with each other, keeping an eye out. So again, this is a visual to share with staff, parents, carers, and young people about recognizing signs of distress, giving you signs about when you need to take a break and look after yourself. So keep an eye out for your window of tolerance. And then also think about the fact that when you're not within your window of tolerance, it's okay to not be functioning well. It's okay to not be as high performing as you would like to be, not being able to think as clearly as you would like, not having as much energy as you would like. It's okay, and it makes sense in terms of this model. A similar way to share this idea is the hand model of the brain. And I wonder if people have come across this as part of the Attachment Aware Building Relational Schools project or work that you've been doing with the SEMH team in your schools. This is a nice way to share with young people the idea of the thinking part of your brain and the emotional part of your brain. And essentially, the emotional part of your brain is the thumb, and the thinking part of your brain is the fingers. And when things are going well, the emotional part of your brain is neatly tucked inside the thinking part of your brain. You're able to think and problem solve, use language, learn, cope, face challenges. But when we are feeling strong emotions like worry or anger, we do what we call flipping our lid, where the thinking part of the brain doesn't work properly and the emotional part of the brain is exposed and it's in control. So this is a lovely way of explaining what's going on when we're overwhelmed by strong emotions like fear, like anger, like worry. And lots of young people use this. So for example, some of the ELSAs that I've worked with use this with young people. And if they're in the class with a young person, the young person's able to go like this to the ELSA to say, I flipped my lid, I need some help. But actually this little visual is really powerful to share and to ask for help. So has anyone heard of the hand model of the brain or used it? Lovely. So recognizing that you've looked at this in the attachment aware project, that's brilliant. Caroline is recognizing that's from the project. Great. If people have any examples of young people in your schools who have accessed the hand model of the brain. And a lot of the time what's happening at the moment is that children are, flipping their lid. And a lot of us adults as well are feeling that we've flipped our lid and we need to take a minute. In terms of building resilience, when we look at the coping strategies in terms of building resilience, the research consistently tells us that resilience is made up of ordinary rather than extraordinary processes. So those ordinary things that we do are building children's resilience. So the very process of being back into the rhythm of school, having those connections with staff, opportunities to learn are building children's resilience. So Mastin is one of the most eminent researchers in the modern field of resilience. And we have a story here from Jade in year 10, which was shared as part of the DFE resources. And I think the power of this and the purpose of sharing this case study is the power of the ordinary and the reminder and reassurance to schools that these ordinary strategies, even within an extraordinary context, can support children's mental health, can support children's resilience. So within this context, Jaden is sharing that his teacher noticed something was wrong. When the teacher listened to him, it made all the difference because he was starting to feel desperate. So some, young people's words, I felt low, sometimes even tearful, having been missing my friends in lockdown and missing sport. My teacher suggested I get more involved in the drama group. I used to love drama and help get the prop set up with my mate. I just felt things lighten up. I felt like I was back and it all seemed different, better again. So the power of small things is a key message that we're sharing. And when we're looking at building resilience, Mastin's model of resilience talks about factors within the individual, within the family, and within the community, which includes school and multi-agency professionals. And you'll see again within that resilience model, relationships, networks, and the impact of physical activities. So hopefully we're not going to spend a lot of time looking at the psychology of resilience because I think it's very familiar to lots of you, but just reminding us of those ordinary magic processes that happen that we need to recognize that when we're putting them in place for children, they are having an impact on mental health. Okay. So within this project, we are returning for people who have accessed this training and introducing psychologically informed first aid. So on the chat, reflections and comments, have people accessed mental health first aid or psychologically informed first aid? If so, if you want to share any examples of how you've been using it over the past months, and if not, this is a really, I think, clear and accessible summary of the approach, which again builds on relationships. Look, listen, and link. Okay, so looking for signs of distress, listening, you can hear that echoed within the case study, and linking children, young people, and adults, and parents and carers to sources of support. And we're going to be sharing with you towards the end of this session local sources of support, particularly around mental health needs. Okay, so that model, you'll see it a lot through the Wellbeing for Education Return project, and many of you might be already familiar with it. Okay, so thinking about that psychology, let's take a pause to reflect. That is a whistle-stop tour, but I'm sure, and Caroline has highlighted that many of you have covered some of this psychology in various projects. Does that psychology make sense to you? Have you been applying this psychology in the past couple of months? And any questions that people wanted to share on the chat? Lovely. So Caroline, you're sharing that Newark schools have accessed the mental health first aid. So the look, listen and link will be very familiar.
So I'm just going to say all Newark schools have actually had the training. So there's a designated mental health first aider within their schools. So really useful.
And in your work, Caroline, is there any examples or any particular elements of the psychology we've shared that you found people using, finding useful, things that have stood out?
Yeah, going back to the it was actually the emotions coaching. So we basically, the flip the lid element. So I see that all the time in schools. So that the emotions coaching there is embedded into their practice on sort of a daily basis, really. And I do see that quite often schools are not really aware that they're using it, but it's embedded into their good practice. So
yeah, fantastic. Thanks very much. That's great, Caroline. Any other reflections or questions before we think about applying this?
I was just going to say about the flip the lid model. I think it's really useful, because I think sometimes when you say psychology to someone, they think, well, I don't know anything about psychology, I've never studied that. But actually, that's a really simple tool for both educators and young people to understand. And I like the way you explain the visual, that they can just actually signal with their hand that, I need a little bit of help. Yeah, I really like that.
Oh, thanks, Natalie. Thanks everyone for sharing examples and comments on the chat as we go through. I can see my colleagues keeping an eye on everything you're sharing. Lovely. I'm mindful of time, so I'm going to keep going. If you have any questions and you want more detail about anything, please do ask. So that psychology is the evidence base that we have drawn upon to create this support and guidance for schools. And when we had to think about how do we apply this, the graduated response is a model that people are very familiar with in the area of SCND, and that idea of there's things we need to do for everyone and there's things we need to do for targeted groups, we thought was very useful in the current context. So in terms of thinking about applying this psychology within the recovery and return to school, we have in the handbook, the full handbook is on the Wellbeing for Education Return website that you can download. The handbook works in that it's got guidance on a whole level for universal, targeted groups and individual young people. And then there's also 5 separate information packs that you can pick out if you wanted to look at any in particular detail. Okay, so I'm not going to go through the content of the handbook, but I'm going to tell you what's in there so you can reflect on any bits that you would like to look at. So in terms of universal support, it draws on the 5 principles and it talks about what we need to do for everybody. And already I can hear echoes of this in the things that you have been sharing in terms of what's been working for you. So we have the importance of an explicit focus on well-being. And what's really encouraging to hear is that you are starting with the staff looking after yourselves and each other. Involving the school community in planning wherever possible. And that links back to another comment I've seen on the chat, that you've been focusing on communication, most importantly, keeping in touch with children, young people, families, staff, etc. The importance of embedding social and emotional learning within your curriculum, and also using data where possible to monitor well-being. And that is something we're going to be sharing with you shortly. So within the DFE resources, I just want to nod to this because some schools I know have used this whole school college approach within their school improvement plans, etc. So if you use this model and it's familiar to you, you can know that this work is linking with it, particularly around leadership and management. And if it is new to you, you've not come across it before, feel free to have a look. But what I wanted to do is to really reflect on some interesting research that has looked at how has the pandemic affected learning, in particular in schools and colleges. Now, there's a range of different studies, in particular the CO space study, which has been released recently, which has looked at, you know, the negatives and challenges people have faced. But what's really interesting, in particular, some young people views research, which has shared some positives and opportunities that have occurred. For example, increased levels of community mindedness, compassion and concern, and opportunities to open doors for new ways of learning. So schools are sharing that actually the blended learning approach has opened up lots of new and different opportunities. So I'd be quite interested to hear via the chat if people recognise that, and actually within the challenges you've noticed new opportunities as well. What's really interesting, I'm just going to flag up some particular research, because we actually have the research tools that we can share with you that you can use if you wanted to follow up on this in your school. So Nottingham City, who's one of our collaborators, did some research around young people views sort of in the summertime, I think, around asking young people, you know, what will help them in the return to school. The strong themes that came across were the importance of relationships, the importance of feeling safe, the need for certainty, but also themes of opportunities, things they've had a chance to do during lockdown and during the return to school. We also had some of our educational psychology colleagues who did some research with school staff, where we asked, you know, what do you as school staff need? And again, these are some of the themes that came out, which really link to some of the things that you guys are sharing as well. The practicalities of keeping safe, the challenge of reducing learning gaps, managing parental and carer concerns, and particularly thinking about transition and building relationships. Now, we found in planning the handbook and the content of the session today, we found this research really useful. What are young people and school staff telling us that they need? So what we've actually developed is questionnaires using the questions that they used in that research. In Nottingham City, they had research evidence from over 2,000 young people. So we've used the research questions, and we can give you this Microsoft Forms link, which is a tool that you can use to access pupil views. So there's a primary and a secondary version. There's also a school staff survey, and there's also a parent carer survey. So you can access these questionnaires through these slides and through the website. You can use them to check in with your staff, check in with your pupils and parents and carers if you're interested in adapting what you're doing. So we're sharing these with you as part of the survey today. The other thing we wanted to share with you was an interesting piece of research that has been completed by Barnardo's. So this involved 100 young people from across the country, where they asked young people what kept them well during lockdown. So they focused on challenges, and Barnardo's have shared a lot of research about what has been hard for children and young people, particularly children in vulnerable situations. But they were really interested in the coping and resilience skills that young people have been using over the past couple of months. They've produced this fabulous graphic, which is based on the views of 100 young people who work with Barnardo's, where they've asked what has kept you well, and young people have shared these things. And I think if you look at this graphic, hopefully it's big enough for you to see, you can see the things that young people have been sharing. Lots of the things that schools have been supporting them with, but also community-based things. And again, back to that, you know, ordinary, simple things. It's not all singing and dancing all the time. It's, you know, those powerful things like relationships, having a sense of belonging, being physically well. So these are the things that young people have shared with Barnardo's and asked that these things are central in the recovery planning. Okay, so any questions or reflections on the young people views, tools and ideas and things that young people are sharing? Are you finding that the young people in your schools are telling you the same things? Does this ring true with you? Is there anything additional that you wanted to reflect? Please do share on the chat. Okay. So when we think about that universal provision, we also know that there are some particular targeted groups of young people who, for various different reasons, over the past couple of months, have had additional needs and have needed additional support. And what we found in the resources is that it's not necessarily the children that we know are already in vulnerable situations. So, you know, pre-coronavirus, we already identified children with SEND, as children needing additional support, but actually children of key workers throughout the past few months have needed additional support. So within the resources, there's actually particular resources around different groups. And actually, Natalie, I wanted you to come in here and talk a little bit about the resources that you've developed in the aftermath of George Floyd's death in America, and the impact on mental health needs for the BAME community, resources that the tech team have created, which are accessible online, I think.
So Arla, we're continuing to sort of think about resources that we can work with children and young people who have been sort of affected by the issues that we've seen over lockdown period as well. On our tech page, we have under the equality section, there's the racism part and about we're doing work on anti-racism, and we've also got under the emotional health and wellbeing part the impact of racism on mental health. So there's some reports there that you can read, and we're just going to continually upload that. And we've been working with other members of the local authority on anti-racism and how we can work together really, and what we can do in schools to support them and what they can do in their curriculum. So yeah, there's lots kind of happening. I would say there's still a lot of work to do, but that's something we're continuing on with. So I would just encourage everyone to look at the schools health portal. So under those sections, you'll be able to find hopefully things that you find interesting that can help you.
Fab. Thanks, Natalie. Would you be able to pop a link to the school's help
portal
into the
sure.
chat, please? That would be fab. Thank you so much. In particular, the charity Bernardo's have also, they're trying to, particularly raise awareness about the impact of the lockdown on children living in poverty and children living in families where there's experiences of domestic violence. So again, particular groups, I'm interested via the chat if people want to share in your area, because most of the schools here today are from the Newark and Sherwood area, any particular groups that you have found have needed additional support as a result of the lockdown in your schools, and also in the return to schools phase. So any particular groups that you think as a school we're putting in a little extra support for these groups, please do share. Children looked after, thanks Jenny. Yeah, so additional, particularly there might have been disruptions. Any other groups that people identified, any not on the list? This is not an exhaustive list. This is based on some early research that's coming out. Yeah, Tim, you're picking up on school staff as well, a particular group who've been working really hard and are really exhausted. Interesting, Kate, talking about families with multiple children with multiple needs and multiple children with SEND. Thank you very much. Please do keep sharing on the chat your reflections of particular groups in your school that you're working with. While people are sharing reflections, I want to also draw your attention to some children are needing additional support at this time, aren't they? So within the handbook, just to let you know that there is an additional support and transition back into education. Unfortunately, I think in some of our special schools, there are still children who have not returned to school because of the complexity of their needs or their health needs. So there are some children where we're all working really hard to support their transition to school when that is safe to do so. And there's actually a planning tool based on the 5 principles of recovery, linking to all of the resources here, where if you felt like you were a bit stuck and you needed to sit down and make an individual plan, you can do so. So you can access that through the handbook. Okay. And I guess what we're reminding ourselves, I saw a lovely comment there. Someone is saying, it's powerful to go back to basics at this time. Absolutely. And the back to basics for us really, and for me, is when we're seeing behaviours in our schools, in the community, we're really seeing the tip of the iceberg, particularly at this time, aren't we? And actually there's so much under the surface, under that iceberg, and the behaviours that we're seeing are communication of our emotions and feelings. So we're really focusing on a relationship-based approach to understanding behaviour. And I'm sharing actually a very timely share here because Dr. Karen Treisman has actually been awarded an MBE at the weekend. I don't know if people are aware of her work. but if you are, you know, a very well-deserved MBE, she's sharing some fabulous visuals based on relationship-based approaches. So every interaction is an intervention, and that is such a powerful message to share with staff, parents, young people, that everything we're doing, interacting with young people in this recovery time, is an intervention in itself. Okay, so what we're going to do is, I'm going to share with you a series of resources now. I'm going to go through them quite quickly. I'm not going to share in particular anything in any great detail, but if people have any particular questions, please pop them on the chat. And then hopefully we'll have about 10 minutes at the end to answer any particular questions that have been popping up. Before I move on to the resources section, Natalie, I'm just going to check in. Are there any particular questions that we need to share, or are there any themes that you're picking up on the chat that you wanted to share with people?
I think I saw that someone said that families are new in terms of the change in their financial circumstances, which I think I know you mentioned earlier, Orla, about the change to their sort of socio-economical
that's a very interesting
status.
point.
But yeah, so I think that's something that we've probably seen a bit of right now, but as the sort of pandemic continues, I think it's something we definitely should be really mindful of going forward, because unfortunately things might get worse. We don't know what's going to happen, but yeah, I think having that in our minds when we're working with families and being really sensitive to that. Also, someone said that they've seen a small group of children not previously identified in any group showing high anxiety on arrival at school and potentially being a flight risk. I think that's really like something that's come out of my conversations with schools about pupils that they kind of had never, you know, imagined would have any sort of issues, or they maybe knew their name but weren't really aware of their circumstances. Those kind of people, those children, making sure that we're supporting them. And I think showing children the difference between what is normal worry and what all us adults probably feel to a degree, and what when it actually becomes anxiety and it sort of overflows into that anxiety. Just having a look at things are moving in the chat. I think I'm really bad at looking at this chat, because once I read something, something else pops up.
Yeah, and such interesting things being shared, Natalie, isn't it? You know, that comment here we have about, you know, some isolated or odd behavior we would not have seen before, and that just reminds me of the iceberg model. You know, these very strange, unusual, unexpected behaviors, and what we're doing within a relationship-based approach is we're trying to look at what's going on under the surface. Absolutely. Thanks so much, Natalie. Keeping an eye on the chat for me. That's great.
I'm trying.
It's fabulous that people are sharing information as well. Such rich information about what you're observing on the ground, what's working, what particular groups do we need to support with. Okay, so this part of the content is particularly locally focused. So this is the bit that the DFE really wanted us to talk about, what's available locally. So these resources are for you as mental health leads in schools, but also to share with young people and parents and carers. Okay, so the handbook that I've been talking about is accessible via the project website, which is here, medsupport.org.uk, Wellbeing for Education Return. And the 5 information packs, again, these can stand alone, and these are things that you could share. So the first is about guidance for talking to children and young people, difficult conversations around loss, bereavement and change in particular, but also around worries and things that they're struggling with. The second is about supporting adult well-being, which includes staff and parents or carers. The third is some psychological information and resources around loss, bereavement and change. And if you think that will be something that you would want to focus on, that is something we can look at in more detail in webinar 2. Information about particular targeted groups, and some information as well about curriculum support. So in terms of the talking and listening to children and young people, a couple of things that we just want to share as the headlines from that resource. The key questions, the key guidance really in response to questions is not to brush questions aside, even if we don't know the answers, and to apply the Goldilocks principle. Now, any ELSAs among you will be familiar with this because we look at this on the ELSA training. The Goldilocks principle is about giving children enough information, not too much so that they're overwhelmed, and not too little so that they don't know anything and make assumptions and make things up for themselves. And within that, we keep in mind their language level and their emotional level. So we think very carefully about the language that they can understand. And we also realize that children are active in constructing their recovery from loss. Okay. There's some resources around adult wellbeing. In particular, there's an staff wellbeing audit. Someone in the chat earlier on mentioned that you've already done this with your staff. So if you have any that you've used that you'd like to share, please feel welcome to do so, but that's in the handbook. In particular around loss, bereavement and change. Many of you might have attended the loss, bereavement and change webinar that we did in the summer term. The recording of that is available on the MED website, and we can't recommend enough the Winston's Wish charity, which we use all the time in our work in the Educational Psychology Service. So I don't know if people have similar experiences of Winston's Wish, but any of your children experiencing loss and bereavement, I would definitely recommend support from Winston's Wish. In terms of the local support networks, all of the teams involved in this training, myself from the Educational Psychology Service and all colleagues that you've heard, we've put links on the slides to how you can access our services. And also increasingly, I think we now have over 250 ELSAs trained across Nottinghamshire, which is a fantastic resource for schools. So recognising that those ELSAs within the local networks are there. A piece of work that many of you might have been involved in, it might be new to you, is the Understanding Behaviour in Schools toolkit. So focusing again on a relationship based to inclusion. Just to flag up now, this is a piece of work that lots of us in the County Council and in schools were working on before lockdown, and it was actually due to launch in April. So that was put on pause. We're launching it now. It's a toolkit for how to use relationship based approaches in schools. It talks about the research evidence behind this approach, and it also gives practical tools. So for example, it talks about things like frequently asked questions and challenges to this approach, and how schools in Nottinghamshire who've used this approach have adapted that, how to include parents and carers and pupil voice in the approach, and then some practical tools. Caroline, you mentioned the emotion coaching. That is spoken about in there, practical tools that schools can use. So that resource is on there. It's launching as part of the Wellbeing for Education return. It's a potential next step for us as a region, and there's also a consultation on the website if people want to give their views about relationship-based approaches that you've seen working during lockdown that we want to continue into the future. So we also have the local offer, which is the Knots Help Yourself. And we have some fantastic resources from a group called MH2K, which is a group of young people who've been doing research with CAMS in Nottingham City and Nottinghamshire. Their campaign that they're launching at the moment is the #RealPeople campaign. These young people are young people who've used CAMS services in Nottinghamshire and Nottingham City, and they did some research to talk about how they want mental health services to improve and to be more accessible. And one of the things they want is for real people who've used the services to be part of the media campaigns. So Natalie, you shared this with me originally, so correct me here if I'm wrong. There's a poster pack, isn't there, that schools can use, they can put it up in schools where there's a series of young people, and there's pictures and posters that they want schools to use, real people who've used the services. Is that right, Natalie?
Yep, that's right, Orla. So they are also on the schools portal under the emotional health and wellbeing section, and there's a little MH2K section. So the posters and the links, they've made some really good YouTube videos, and it's young people that were actually, like you said, involved in the research. And they took loads of time over them, and I think you can really, when you watch it, I think that really comes across. And they've been so involved in the project. So yeah, I'd really encourage everyone to have a look at the report, which is online as well. So some of the recommendations they put forward for us as a local authority in Nottingham City, local authority, how we can tackle improving mental health services for them.
Absolutely. Lovely. And these are the local services that are being highlighted as part of those resources. And in that resource, just to reiterate that everything we talk about today will be on the Wellbeing for Education Return website. So if you can't remember where things are, we're going to start populating that website. Everything will be on there by the end of this week. These are all the local services that the MH2K are highlighting. And in those posters that Natalie's talking about, it has a little brief explanation of what these teams do and how to access them. So some really good resources there. Okay. Again, a good resource that lots of people work with already, but just to remind you about Young Minds, they've got some really good, two resources in particular we wanted to highlight: supporting your children through the pandemic. This is for adults who are supporting children, and also wellbeing tips for staff. So staff who are struggling. So for those of you who are putting a big emphasis on staff wellbeing, that might be something you want to have a look at. Very practical tips, things that you could share with your staff. We wanted to highlight in particular some really good resources for adults. So for adults, staff, yourselves, parents, carers, ourselves who are struggling or who might just need a little bit of extra help. I think we're all struggling a bit, even just someone's focusing here that parents are saying how tired their children are. I think we're all feeling that tiredness building up to half term, aren't we indeed? So there's a couple of resources that we just wanted to draw people's attention to. Myself, I just discovered the Mental Health at Work resource over the weekend because it was World Mental Health Day. It was shared online. It's a fantastic website which with a range of resources for adults to support mental health at work. I would definitely recommend having a look. So I just found it at the weekend. I thought it was really useful. The other thing I've come across recently, and I wonder if anybody has engaged with them, is education support. And this is a free online counselling support for all existing and recently retired school staff that anyone who's struggling at the moment can access. So for all of these, the links are in these slides when you get access to them. The charity Mind, the charity Samaritans are always there. And if you go on their website at the minute, they've got big posters saying, we're here, don't forget about us, if you need help, ask. There's also a really useful NHS website, which has a link of mental health helplines for adults. And then you can also search in your local area about what's relevant. So these are some really good resources that you might want to have, you know, in your mind if you want to recommend to adults that you're supporting. Okay, so we're doing okay for time. What's really interesting is the extent to which the DFE has said that this training, this project needs to respond to local need. So we've shared these resources with you. We'd really like to hear from you via a survey. So there's a link here. I think an email from my colleague Rachel, it's also popped up in the invitation. And I think my colleague Ed is just going to pop it in the chat as well, a link to this survey where we just want to know what you think of the content, which bits have been particularly useful. And then we'd like to ask your views about what you would like to see in future webinars and as part of this support. Okay, so what do you need from your local mental health networks as schools? Fabulous. Thank you very much, Ed. So there's a survey there if you want to check in on that and share your views about what's been useful and what you would find useful in our next network session, which again will be district led, end of November, early December. We're hoping to get those dates out to you as soon as possible. And as you're having a look at that, we would like you to ask any questions on the chat that we haven't considered. We'd like you, if you want to leave with a few final strategies from positive psychology, we'd like you, if you want to share 3 things that you're particularly grateful for, and a mission to carry out a random act of kindness over the next 2 days. And when this is all over, I will ... So this is a personal reflection if you want to use in any of your work that you're doing. If anyone wants to share via the chat, feel free to do so. And we're going to leave you with the link to the Wellbeing for Education Return website, which is where all of the resources for this project are going to be. And as soon as you log off today, you can access these slides through that website as well. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for the rich and fantastic information that you're telling us about what's working in schools, you know, what you're finding hard, what you need more of. So please do tell us through the survey about what we need to do, what we need to respond to for webinar 2 and as part of the wider project. And thank you so much for your time today. So if people want to check out through the chat, Ed's going to stop the recording, hopefully, when people are checking out. And again, thank you so much for your time. Take care, everybody. And as much as you can, try and get a good break over half term. And although I didn't really see anyone, it was lovely to connect with you today, and keep up the fantastic work that's going on across the county. Okay, take care, everybody.
Thank you. See you later.